The night was restless. Rain poured in an endless, rhythmic patter, pooling into darkened gutters and turning the streets into shimmering veins of reflected neon. Officer Max Carter sat in his cruiser, gripping the steering wheel, his gut twisted with unease. The dispatch had been vague: strange noises in an alley, a possible injured animal, but something about the static-laced call sent a shiver through him. He pulled into the narrow alleyway, headlights cutting through the curtain of rain. The place smelled of rot, wet garbage, stale alcohol, something metallic, blood. Max clenched his jaw, stepping out, the cold immediately seeping through his uniform. His flashlight flickered as he moved deeper into the alley, past rusted dumpsters and broken glass. Then he saw it, huddled against the damp brick wall, barely visible in the shadows, was a dog, a German shepherd, its fur soaked, clinging to an emaciated frame. Its ribs protruded like the bars of a forgotten cage, and deep scars lined its legs and torso, as if it had been bound for too long. Max exhaled sharply. He took a slow step forward, lowering his flashlight. Golden eyes met his, not just with fear, but a deep, haunting intelligence, as if the dog knew something it shouldn't. A silent plea, and something else, a warning. "Easy, buddy," Max murmured, kneeling carefully. "You're safe now." The dog flinched at his voice but didn't move away. It was too weak. That's when Max noticed the worn K9 unit collar around its neck. The metal tag scratched, almost unreadable. He reached out, brushing away the dirt to reveal the faint letters. Titan Security, Unit 047. Max frowned. A private K9 unit? How the hell did one of their dogs end up like this? Beside the dog, something caught his eye, a torn scrap of fabric, damp and smeared with dirt. As he picked it up, a strange sense of dread slithered down his spine. The faded imprint of a security logo was barely visible on the cloth. Titan. A sharp gust of wind swept through the alley, rattling the loose metal sheets overhead. But the chill that ran down Max's spine wasn't from the cold. The shepherd, Max, he would later call him, suddenly tensed, his weak body trembling. His ears flicked toward the darkness beyond the alley's entrance. Max followed the dog's gaze, scanning the empty street. A single streetlight buzzed and flickered. The city was still, silent, too silent. Then, from somewhere deep in the shadows, a sound, a low growl. Not the dog's. Max's grip tightened on his flashlight. His cop instincts screamed at him. Something was watching. The shepherd let out a faint whimper, shifting closer to Max. Not just for warmth, for protection. Max clenched his jaw, lifting his radio. "Dispatch. This is Officer Carter. I need an animal rescue unit at my location, ASAP." As the static crackled in response, Max swore he heard something else in the distance, a whisper. And then, just as suddenly, the growling stopped. Max kept his hand on his holstered weapon, his pulse thundering in his ears. The alley felt wrong, like it was swallowing sound, absorbing the night's breath, leaving behind an eerie silence. The rain had slowed to a faint drizzle, the only noise the distant hum of traffic from the main road. But he knew something had been there, watching. The German shepherd, Max, as he would later call him, whimpered softly, his ears flicking back toward the darkness. Despite his weakness, his instincts were sharp, his body tense. This wasn't just an abandoned dog. It was a survivor. Headlights swept across the alley's mouth, and a second cruiser pulled up, tires splashing through rain-soaked pavement. Officer David Foster, Max's partner, stepped out, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by concern as he took in the scene. "Damn," David muttered, crouching beside the shepherd. "This dog looks like hell." "He's K9, Max said, showing him the collar. "Titan Security." David's brow furrowed. "Titan? That's a private security firm, right?" Max nodded. "Yeah, high-profile contracts, government buildings, corporate black sites, military research facilities. They don't lose dogs." David ran a hand through his damp hair. "Then why is one of theirs starving in an alley?" Max didn't have an answer, but he had a bad feeling. He gently placed a hand on the shepherd's side. "Hang in there, buddy. You're coming with us." The dog let out a weak, raspy exhale, a sigh of exhaustion, of relief. Blank. Blank. An unsettling discovery. At the precinct, Max stayed with the dog in the small back room they'd set up for rescues. The moment he stepped away, Max's ears perked, his gaze following every movement. Despite everything he had endured, he still had the discipline of a trained police dog. Bella, a veterinarian from Animal Services, arrived not long after. Her face darkened as she examined Max. "He's been through hell," she said, voice tight, severely underfed, multiple scars, pressure sores, meaning he was likely restrained for long periods. Max clenched his jaw. "You think he was caged?" Bella nodded. "And not for a short time." She hesitated, pressing her fingers gently around the dog's throat. "There's also something else. Marks around his neck." Max tensed. "Like from a collar? A specific kind?" Bella's expression hardened. "Electric. Probably a shock collar." Max's stomach churned. Canines weren't trained with those. Ever. Whoever had handled Max wasn't just mistreating him, they were breaking him. David walked in just as Max was processing the weight of Bella's words. "I ran a check on Titan security," he said, holding up his phone. "No missing dog reports. No record of this shepherd in their system." Max frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Unless," David said grimly, "they erased him. Blank. Underscore, blank. A trail of lies." Max glanced at the scrap of fabric he had found in the alley. Now sitting on his desk under the bright precinct lights. The Titan logo was still barely visible beneath the grime. This thing was torn from a uniform. He muttered. Someone wearing Titan security gear was near him. Recently. David pulled out his phone. "Maybe they'll talk. If not, I know someone who might." Max arched a brow. David smirked. "A former employee." Max turned back toward the shepherd. Max had been thrown away. But why? And by whom? One thing was clear. This dog was evidence. And someone wanted him gone. Max sat at his desk, his fingers tapping restlessly against the scratched wooden surface. Something wasn't adding up. Titan Security was known for its secrecy. But erasing an entire K9 unit from their records? That wasn't just an oversight, it was deliberate. David, standing beside him, scrolled through his phone. "I found the guy," he said, turning the screen toward Max. A grainy photo of a man in his late 40s appeared, John Mercer. Ex-Titan Security K9 handler. Max skimmed the details. Mercer had left Titan 2 years ago. His record spotless, except for one detail, his abrupt resignation. No official reason, no farewell statements, just, "Gone. That's our guy," Max said. "He might know what happened to Max." David nodded. "Then let's pay him a visit." Blank. Underscore, blank. A man with secrets. Mercer lived in a rundown trailer on the outskirts of town, tucked away in an overgrown lot. The smell of damp earth and rust filled the air as Max and David stepped out of the cruiser. A dog barked in the distance. But it wasn't the aggressive kind, more like a warning. David knocked on the metal door. "John Mercer, we just want to talk." There was a long silence. Then, a soft shuffle of movement inside. A moment later, the door creaked open just enough for Mercer to peek through. His eyes were sharp but weary, as if they had seen too much. "I don't talk to cops," he muttered. Max didn't back down. "Then talk to a K9 handler." He pulled out his phone, showing Mercer a photo of Max, the German shepherd, lying weakly in the precinct. "You know this dog, don't you?" The reaction was immediate. Mercer's breath hitched, and his grip on the door tightened. Guilt, recognition, fear. "You need to leave," he said quickly, moving to close the door. Max wedged his boot into the gap. "Not until you tell me what happened to him." Mercer hesitated. Then, with a defeated sigh, he stepped aside. "Come in. Blank. Underscore, blank. The truth comes to light." The inside of the trailer smelled of old coffee and dust. Stacks of dog training manuals and worn-out gear cluttered the space. A reminder of a past Mercer had clearly tried to leave behind. He sat down heavily, rubbing his hands over his face. Max wasn't supposed to survive, he muttered. David shot a glance at Max. "Not supposed to survive?" Mercer continued. "Titan Security doesn't retire dogs like the police or the military. They use them until they break. If AK-9 isn't aggressive enough, isn't efficient enough, they don't send them to a shelter." Max felt his stomach tighten. "They kill them." Mercer gave a slow, grim nod. That's what should have happened to Max. But he ran. Somehow, he escaped before they could put him down. The room was deathly silent. David exhaled sharply. Jesus. Max's mind raced. Someone had gone through the effort of erasing Max's records, getting rid of him like a piece of faulty equipment. But he had survived, and now, someone knew he was still alive. Max looked Mercer dead in the eye. Who gave the order? Mercer hesitated, then whispered one name: Martin Graves. Max's blood ran cold. Martin Graves, Titan Security's regional director. And the man who had the power to silence anything, or anyone. Max exchanged a glance with David. They had their lead, but it also meant one thing. They weren't just looking for answers anymore. They were being hunted. The air inside Mercer's trailer felt suffocating. The weight of his confession pressed down on Max and David like a heavy storm cloud. Titan Security didn't retire their dogs. They disposed of them. And Martin Graves, the man at the top, was the one pulling the strings. Max's hands clenched into fists. How many others had suffered the same fate as Max? How many K9s had been erased? Discarded like broken tools? Mercer's voice broke through the silence. You need to leave. Now. David frowned. Why? Mercer exhaled sharply, standing up and peering out through the cracked blinds. His shoulders tensed. Because if I know Titan, they already know you came to see me. Max's stomach dropped. They were being watched. A car engine rumbled outside. A second later, headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the trailer's interior in ghostly flashes. Mercer turned to them, his face tight with panic. Back door. Now. Max didn't hesitate. He grabbed David's arm and yanked him toward the rear exit just as tires screeched outside. A dark SUV came to a sharp stop in front of the trailer. And two men in tactical gear jumped out, weapons drawn. Go, 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 Mercer hissed, shoving them through the back door. They barely made it 2 steps into the overgrown backyard before gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the thin walls of the trailer. The sound was deafening, metal and glass shattering as Titan's enforcers made their move. Max ducked low, keeping David close. They're trying to silence Mercer. David cursed under his breath. And us. Mercer grabbed an old shotgun from a stash near the back door and pumped it. I'll hold them off. You get out of here. No way in hell, Max started. But Mercer cut him off. You don't get it, do you? Mercer's voice was urgent. You have proof. You have Max. I'm a loose end. But you? You're a problem they can't afford to let walk away. A second volley of bullets shredded through the trailer, the muzzle flashes illuminating the night like bursts of lightning. Go. Mercer shoved them toward the tree line. Max hesitated for only a second. He hated leaving Mercer behind. But he knew the man was right. If they stayed, they were dead. Grabbing David by the arm, he bolted for the trees. Blank. Blank. A desperate escape. The woods were a mess of tangled roots and damp earth. The rain had softened the ground, making every step treacherous. Max's breath came fast as he and David sprinted deeper into the forest. Their only cover against the men hunting them. Behind them, the crack of gunfire rang out again. Then, silence. Max's stomach twisted. Mercer. David didn't stop running. We have to keep moving. Max forced himself forward, his mind racing. If Titan Security was willing to gun down Mercer, then they weren't just covering up the illegal sale of K9s. They were eliminating anyone who got too close. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just about Max, the dog. This was a criminal operation at the highest level. And now, they were targets. David stumbled on a root, cursing. Max grabbed his arm, keeping him upright. We need a car, a phone, something. We can't go back to the station. David wiped the sweat from his brow. You think Titan has people watching the cops? Max's jaw tightened. I'd bet my life on it. A rustling sound made them both freeze. Max reached for his gun. A second later, a low growl echoed through the trees. It wasn't human. Max turned his head just in time to see a dark shape emerging from the shadows. David took a step back. No way. It was Max, the German shepherd. And he wasn't alone. Behind him, 3 more dogs stood at the edge of the trees. Malnourished, scarred, but their eyes burned with something primal. Survival. Recognition. Max felt his breath hitch. They weren't just running from Titan Security anymore. They had found the others. And now, they had a chance to fight back. Max and David stood frozen, staring at the 4 German shepherds that had emerged from the shadows. They were battered, scarred from old wounds, but their eyes burned with a fierce intensity. Max, the dog, stood at the front. His ears alert, his body tense. The others flanked him, forming a silent line of defense. David swallowed hard. These are Titan's dogs, aren't they? Max nodded, his mind racing. The ones they threw away. The ones like Max. David's voice dropped to a whisper. Then why are they here? Before Max could answer, a sharp sound cut through the silence. The snap of a branch. Footsteps. They were being followed. Max signaled for David to get low, and they both crouched behind a fallen log. The shepherds didn't move. They stayed where they were, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the trees. Waiting. A flashlight beam flickered through the forest, bouncing between the trunks. Low voices whispered back and forth. They went this way. Cole said not to let them leave the woods. Max clenched his jaw. Martin had sent his men after them. We can't outrun them, Max thought grimly. They were already exhausted, but maybe we don't have to. He glanced at Max, the dog. The German shepherd met his gaze and let out a low, rumbling growl. The others followed suit, their bodies shifting, muscles tensing. Max's heart pounded. The dogs were waiting for him to decide. A choice. Run, or fight. Max exhaled sharply and turned to David. We make our stand here. David's eyes widened. Are you insane? Max pulled his gun, checking the magazine. We don't get another shot at this. If we take these guys down, we take their radios, their weapons, and we get the hell out of here. David hesitated for half a second, then pulled his own weapon. You better be right about this. Max turned back to Max, the shepherd. You with me, buddy? The dog let out a sharp bark. A command. And in that instant, the other three dogs moved. Blank. Underscore, blank. The trap springs. The moment the first gunman stepped into the clearing, Max gave the signal. Max, the shepherd, lunged first. He struck like lightning, clamping his powerful jaws onto the man's arm before he could raise his weapon. The attacker screamed, stumbling back as Max yanked him down. The second gunman barely had time to react before the other three dogs charged. Chaos exploded in the clearing. Gunshots cracked through the air. One bullet whizzed past Max's head, slamming into a tree. David returned fire, taking out the shooter before he could aim again. One of the enforcers swung a knife at a shepherd, but the dog dodged nimbly, circling before clamping onto the man's leg. Max fired at the last attacker, dropping him with a single shot. And then, silence. The only sounds left were panting breaths, the rustle of leaves, and the soft growls of the shepherds standing victorious. David slowly straightened. Holy hell. Max looked at the fallen enforcers, then at the dogs. They weren't just survivors. They were fighters. And for the first time, Max realized they weren't running anymore. They were going to end this. The forest fell into an eerie silence. Max wiped the sweat from his forehead, his grip on his gun still tight. David stood beside him, his breathing heavy, his eyes darting between the bodies on the ground. The four German shepherds remained still, their ears twitching, their eyes locked on the trees beyond the clearing. They weren't celebrating. They were waiting. Max followed their gaze. More were coming. David cursed under his breath. Martin won't stop. Not after this. If these were just scouts, then we don't have much time. Max nodded. We move before they regroup. Max, the shepherd, gave a sharp bark, then turned, leading the way. The other three dogs followed without hesitation. Max and David grabbed the fallen enforcers' weapons and radios, slinging extra ammunition over their shoulders. They didn't just survive the ambush. They were now armed, and the hunt was no longer one-sided. Blank. Underscore, blank. Breaking into the lion's den. The plan was simple. Find Martin. End this. They followed Max, the shepherd, through the woods, the dogs sniffing out trails invisible to the human eye. Max's mind raced as they moved. Martin was dangerous, but he wasn't the real problem. Titan K9 was. Shadow's file, and all the others they found at Blackridge, had been evidence of something bigger. The company wasn't just dumping dogs like defective equipment. They were selling them, training them, pushing them beyond their limits, then auctioning them off to the highest bidder. Some went to private contractors. Some ended up in illegal fighting rings. And those who didn't make the cut, they were discarded. Just like Max, the dog. Just like the other four shepherds who now ran at his side. Max clenched his jaw. No more. A sudden crackling noise burst through the radio clipped to his belt. Any teams? Report in. Do you have them? Martin's voice. Max and David froze. Max lifted the radio, pressing the button, disguising his voice. Negative. Still tracking. Silence. Then, Martin's low, grating voice. You better not fail me. If they get to the compound, it's over. Max and David exchanged glances. The compound. That's where Martin was. David gave a tight grin. That was easier than expected. Max returned it. Let's make it count. They weren't running anymore. They were going to finish this. The compound loomed ahead, a fortress of concrete and steel hidden deep in the forest. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, casting harsh white light on the barbed wire fence. Armed guards patrolled in pairs, their rifles glinting in the night. Max and David crouched behind a fallen log, surveying the entrance. Max, the German shepherd, was silent but tense, his ears pinned back. The other 3 dogs mirrored his stance, their bodies coiled like loaded springs. Too many guards. David muttered, we'll never get in without raising hell. Max smirked. Then let's raise hell. He reached into his stolen gear, pulling out a small explosive charge. David's eyes widened. Where the hell did you get that? Max just grinned. One of Martin's guys won't be needing it anymore. They worked quickly, setting the charge near a power junction by the fence. Then, Max gave a low whistle. The shepherds moved instantly, slipping into the shadows, circling the compound. They had one job: create chaos. Max and David retreated a safe distance. Max pressed the detonator. Boom! The explosion rocked the ground, sending up a plume of fire and smoke. The compound erupted in shouts. Guards rushed toward the fire, rifles raised, barking orders into their radios. Then, the real attack began. From the opposite side of the compound, Max, the dog, and his pack struck. They moved like ghosts, silent, fast, and brutal. A guard screamed as Max lunged, clamping his jaws onto the man's forearm and twisting. A bone snapped. The second dog, Ghost, took another guard down, his weight slamming into the man's chest, knocking him flat. The third and fourth dogs, Blitz and Rocco, worked together. One went low, the other high, bringing another man to the ground in seconds. Max and David slipped through the chaos, using the confusion to breach the fence. Inside, the compound was worse than Max feared. Rows of cages. Dogs. Hundreds of them. Some were German shepherds, others Malinois, Dobermans, all trained, all waiting for a fate worse than death. Max's blood boiled. Titan K9 hadn't just been dumping old dogs. They were breeding new ones, selling them to mercenaries, to private armies, to criminals. And Martin? Martin was running it all. A voice crackled over the intercom, harsh and furious. Find them, kill them, do not let them leave alive. Max turned to David. We finish this now. David nodded. The shepherds, standing among the cages, growled in unison. It was time. The alarms wailed through the compound, a piercing shriek of chaos and desperation. The guards, scattered and disoriented from the explosion, were now regrouping, their radios crackling with frantic orders. Max, David, and the 4 German shepherds stood in the heart of the enemy's lair, surrounded by cages of abused and discarded K9s. Max's pulse pounded in his ears as he scanned the compound. The warehouse-style building housed not only the captive dogs but also stacks of military-grade weapons. Titan K9 wasn't just trafficking dogs, they were fueling an underground war. David knelt beside the control panel, frantically working on unlocking the cages. We can't leave them here. Max, he said, sweat dripping down his forehead. Max didn't hesitate. Free them all. A voice boomed from the compound's overhead speakers. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Officer Reynolds. It was Martin. His voice was calm, but underneath, there was rage. These dogs were never meant to be in the hands of weak men like you. Max ignored him, watching as the cages clicked open one by one. The captive dogs hesitated for only a second. Then, they surged forward, a wave of fur, muscle, and fury. Max, the German shepherd, led the charge, his deep, guttural bark acting as the signal. The freed dogs stormed out, attacking the guards without fear. David grabbed a rifle off a fallen mercenary, covering Max as he moved. This is a damn war zone, he shouted over the chaos. Max didn't respond. He was already moving toward Martin. The compound's command center was at the back of the warehouse. Max kicked open the door. Weapon raised. Inside, Martin stood with a smirk. A pistol in one hand. A kill switch in the other. "You don't walk out of here alive," Martin said, lifting the remote. And neither do they. Max didn't wait. He fired. The bullet ripped through Martin's shoulder, sending him staggering backward. The kill switch clattered to the floor. Before Martin could reach for it, Max, the shepherd, struck. He lunged, jaws clamping down on Martin's forearm. A scream, a crunch, blood splattered across the monitors. Martin fell, writhing in pain. The remaining guards, seeing their leader down and overrun by furious dogs, dropped their weapons and ran. The compound was burning. The freed K9s, their loyalty once twisted by Titan K9, now had a new pack, a new leader. Max looked at the chaos, then at Martin, who groaned on the floor. "You trained them to kill," Max said, stepping over him. "You never thought they'd turn on you." Outside, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Reinforcements had arrived. Max took one last look at Martin before turning to the dogs. "Let's go home." They had won. The story of Max and the abandoned K9s is more than just a tale of action and justice. It is a powerful reminder of loyalty, resilience, and the consequences of greed. At its core, this journey highlights the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, especially those who have served with unwavering devotion. Max, the officer, and Max, the German shepherd, represent two sides of the same fight, one of survival and the other of justice. One of the biggest takeaways from this story is the responsibility that comes with power. Titan K9 treated their dogs as nothing more than tools, discarding them the moment they were deemed unusable. This mirrors the way corruption often values profit over life, forgetting that every decision has consequences. In contrast, Max and David's actions show the true meaning of leadership and responsibility, one that protects the vulnerable rather than exploits them. Another lesson is that heroes don't always wear badges. While Max and David played their part in taking down a corrupt operation, the real heroes were the dogs themselves. Despite being abused, locked away, and discarded, they fought back. They didn't seek revenge, only freedom, their ability to trust again, to find purpose beyond what was forced upon them, is something truly inspiring. Lastly, the story reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about redemption. The freed K9s were given a second chance, and they proved that even after enduring darkness, they could still find light. Just like Max, they weren't broken, they were survivors. And that is the ultimate lesson. No matter how deep the scars, there is always a way forward.